Hey, this is the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your host, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken, and we're glad you are joining us today. Well, this week is a little different because while we are recording this, Brent is off at camp. So I'll be your host before and after the interview, and I'm really looking forward to this interview. But before we get there, I want to remind you of a few things. We love bringing these conversations to you each week, and we hope that they are helpful to you in your ministry and that you are equipped and encouraged by them. And if you find them helpful, then probably there's someone else who would find them helpful as well. So would you do us a favor? Tell someone else by sharing this post and tagging someone else on social media. And then also tag us at Talk Student Men. And you could also point someone to our website where we have show notes and other helpful things at studentministryconversations.org. And then finally, click subscribe and leave a rating and a comment on whatever platform you are listening to this on. Well, for this week's conversation, I sit down with Jenn Whitmer, and she is a certified Enneagram coach and specializes in interpersonal conflict resolution. And we talk about what the Enneagram is, what the different types are, and how it can be helpful in your personal life, your family, your church, and your student ministry. So I am really looking forward to this, and I hope you are as well. Without any more delay, here's my conversation with Jenn Whitmer. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. And I have a special guest today. Jenn Whitmer is with us, and she knows all about the Enneagram and uses the Enneagram in ministry and coaching and leading and problem solving. And so before I tell you everything and get it wrong, I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell us what you actually do with that. So, Jenn?
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Jenn Whitmer. I help teams and leaders work through conflict and personality clashes. I use the Enneagram as my foundational tool, but we also use communication skills, conflict resolution skills, peacemaking practices, all of those types of fantastic tools that you need when you're working with people. And so I am a speaker, a coach, and love working to support leaders so they can do powerful and connected work and live these wonderful, peaceful lives that we all want.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you are here joining us today. And what I wanted to do was kind of talk about the Enneagram, to kind of drill down a little bit with it and to find out more about that. So can you just tell us what it is? Maybe not getting into the numbers, but just kind of tell us what the Enneagram is, how it can be helpful, kind of explain a little bit about that.
If you are kind of listening to this and you're saying, they keep saying this word, Ennea what? So the Enneagram is a personality framework. And as Russell was talking, there are 9 different types by numbers. And so that's when we're talking about different types. And what I love about the Enneagram is that it shows us why we're doing what we're doing. So I am still a fan of things like Strengths Finders or Clifton Strengths Now, Myers-Briggs, and the Colby. Those are all great assessments. They tend to show us how we do things and what we do, which is a great piece of self-awareness. But where I have found the magic, if you will, in the Enneagram is that it shows us why we're doing that. Like what is motivating us deeply. And so the power of the Enneagram is that it's not only showing us, oh, here's what you're deeply afraid of. It then also shows us, here's what that looks like when you are trying to get that need met in a really healthy way. And here's what that looks like when you're trying to get that need met in a way that is not so healthy for you and unhelpful for others. And so because of that, it gives you a greater sense of self-honesty. And so I like to say the Enneagram helps us be ruthlessly self-honest. Oh, that is really what's happening inside of me. But it also helps us be generously self-compassionate. And so, oh, that's what's happening for me. And then I'm just a firm believer that if we can be generously self-compassionate with ourselves, it extends that compassion to others. The piece about the Enneagram that I love, that it doesn't stick you in a box. It's showing you how your personality structure can help you, how it gets in the way, and what you can lose in that sense of, in a good sense of what can I lie down, or lay down, what can I lay down in a way that brings up the true essence of who God has created me to be. I don't stick in this box. It is this this way of being in the world. Is this helpful? Is this what God totally wants for me? What of this is his gifting? And what of this do I need to put down in a way that lets me be my truest self and the most continually sanctified? Because we're not all there yet. And that sanctification process. And that's what I think is the power of the Enneagram. So if you think about it in that way, I mean, that shows up everywhere. It shows up when I'm working with my kids. It shows up when I'm talking in my marriage. It shows up when I'm talking with my friends. I was just on a meeting. I have a consulting client. It shows up there as I'm watching the different personalities interact. I know myself and what I'm reacting to, what I'm responding to. And so it shows up in all of these different places. And I think the power of it is that it gives us language to talk about what's happening on the inside. We all know there's stuff. We're like, I'm thinking something, but then the Enneagram says, oh, this is what that is. It identifies it for us. And it's like, oh, right. That's it. And now I can do something about it.
Wow. That's so good. What can you tell us about the Enneagram? Is there anything about how it came to be? Or, I mean, if I search online, you get all sorts of different things. So how did it come? How is it helpful? How is it used in different contexts? Anything you can share about that?
Yeah. So just with all of the personality assessments that we use, not just the Enneagram, they have, they started in certain ways, but we all use them in this really modern context. And so we're using the psychological studied aspect of the Enneagram, just like we do for Myers-Briggs, just like we do for StrengthsFinders. There's this modern application of it. And if you want to dig in deep, Beth and Jeff McCord have written a whole long, like 2 or 3 page PDF about the origins of the Enneagram, which is fascinating and really interesting. And where I like to use it is how is this effective now? So my background is in music education. And so one of the things I always used to joke with kids is that Bach used to steal bar songs and put them in the church, and people would get so mad that they would leave. And the first time somebody brought a guitar into the building, like people were in uproars. And so we have lots of things that we use that we redeem because of who God is in us, that's part of our role with partnering with him in creating in the world and co-laboring with Christ in that. So that's what I use the Enneagram for. And so when I'm working with corporate clients, I don't share the gospel lens that I'm working through, but that's always how I'm approaching it. How does this help me grow and develop as the language I use with a corporate client? But when I'm talking with a Christian and a believer, I'm like, this is part of sanctification. How does this revelation that you now see about yourself, to use the log in your own eye analogy, that you now see, how do you now get that out? And now this is a tool that helps us see that. And it's a different kind of mirror to use. It's not the only tool. And by any means, if it's the only tool you use, it's going to end at some point. You have to apply it in other ways. And that's why I use conflict resolution strategies and communication tools. But if I only use those tools without the foundation of self-awareness, we don't use them as effectively. It starts to come out a little sideways in other different connections because I haven't gotten to the root issue. So that's how I like to think about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, thanks for that explanation and kind of showing us kind of the framework, how we can use that. So now I do want to dive into the Enneagram and those numbers that we've been talking about, and to talk about each one and kind of why each one is as it is, what that is helpful for us and what that helps us to watch out for in those numbers. So my initial thought is to start with the number 1, because that makes sense. But I know that we are not going to do that. So we're actually going to start, I think, with 8, is it? Why do we start there?
It's a great question. So I like to start with the 8s for a couple of reasons. One is all of the personalities are rooted in centers of intelligence. So we have a body center of intelligence, a head center of intelligence, and a heart center of intelligence. And they develop in the body, heart, mind order. That's how we develop these centers of intelligence in early childhood. And so the 8s are the first group in the body center of intelligence. They're also, I love 8s. I think they get a bad rap. They're the most intense numbers on the Enneagram, and they want to know what's what, and let's move on. And so if we start with them, it's really helpful. It helps them and everybody else. Yep. So that's why I like to start with the 8s. Sounds good. Yeah. So the 8s are often called the boss, the protective challenger. And it's because they're really about protecting, and they are, all of the numbers have a core fear, and the 8's core fear is being powerless or weak or manipulated. And what they're always looking for is to protect themselves and those who are closest to them. And what happens in that is they have this core weakness that I like to call the core weakness, the thing that is the Ferris wheel that keeps coming back around again. We're like, oh, right, here we are again. And their core weakness is excess. And they are just this intense, always looking for the intensity of life. They are solving problems in the future. They are getting it done. Like I said, they have the most amount of energy in the Enneagram, and they are really doing all of that work so they won't be betrayed. They're always looking to protect themselves and not be betrayed. And they often experience this core struggle of anger. And so do 9s and 1s as we move through. But this core struggle of dealing with anger, 8s can be angry really quickly. And they're very, very passionate people. And they're fantastic leaders. They can also be sometimes a bull in a china shop. And sometimes as they grow, they really learn how to hone that energy for supporting their people. And they're always about protecting people, and in everything they're doing, they're looking to protect people. And so that's the 8s. And then the Enneagram 9s feel very different than the 8s. They're still in this body center. They're still dealing with anger, but instead of pushing into it and into the intensity, they pull way back. And they withdraw. And sometimes 9s are called the harmonious peacemakers because they are just trying to keep things conflict free. Their deep fear is conflict, tension, loss of connection, but they're also afraid of being overlooked. So they have this fear of missing out, not quite missing out, but as if they're going to be unheard and overlooked. And it's because they really want to keep this internal and external harmony, stability, and peace. And if I'm afraid of being overlooked, but I also don't want to lose connection with you, that creates a tension that they're always trying to solve. And that's why their strategy is withdrawing, and it's exhausting. And so their core weakness in Enneagram language is called sloth, but it's not about being lazy. It's that cycle of, I don't want to lose connection with you, so I'm going to fall asleep to my own wants and desires so I can be easygoing. But now I'm a little bit resentful because you didn't hear me. And so, but I'm going to withdraw. And now I'm just tired. It's just way easier to withdraw and numb out than it is to engage in life. And what they are always wanting to know is that their presence matters. And that's really important to 9s, to know that their presence matters, but they also don't want to be the ones that create that space. So that's the big tension for the 9s. And then Enneagram 1s, I like to call the reformers or the reforming perfectionists. And they're always wanting to make things perfect and better. They're always looking to better things. And their core fear in that is that they might be wrong or bad. And it's not, I'm wrong and you're right, but against an external standard. And that external standard is defined by all kinds of different things. And usually they have a very strong internal critic. We've all got an internal dialogue, but 1s have this one voice that is constantly telling them, you did this wrong. This wasn't right. You should have said this. That mistake is there. I can't believe you didn't see it. And it's just mean. And that's the thing that sets the standard, and it always moves the goalposts. And that's what's really challenging for the 1. And what they're wanting is to be in rightness, in balance with whatever that standard is. And they really struggle with resentment because they're seeing all of the things that need to be done. And then they have this idea that I'm the only one that does it. And also this anger of why can't it just be perfect? And so they repress this anger and it comes out as resentment and dissatisfaction and frustration. And they live with that frustration all the time. And what they're really wanting to know is that it's enough. You are good. You are enough. And to quiet that inner critic. So those three in the body center, I'll deal with anger in some kind of way. And then the head center, the next group, they're all dealing with shame. And in some way they're focused on dealing with this emotional struggle of shame. And it starts with the twos. And Enneagram twos, I love to call them the considerate giver because they are always giving. They are helping, they're inserting themselves. And it's because they're afraid if I don't earn your love, you're going to reject me. And so if I don't give this to you, if I am somehow needy, oh my gosh, then I won't be able to be connected with you and be loved and wanted, which is my deep, deep desire. And so their core fear is confusing because it's pride. And it's this core fear comes from, I know what you need. I know better than you, other person, what you need. And I don't have any needs. There's this old movie called 27 Dresses, and she's always the bridesmaid and she tries on all these dresses. And the guy is like, who are you? Do you not have needs? And she's like, no, I'm Jesus. And that's what it's funny. Like we all are human, and twos like to deny that. And that's where that pride comes in. And what they just want to know is they don't have to earn somebody's love. Like they are appreciated and loved. And I heard somebody, it's a two, and I loved it so much that I can't remember their name, but they said twos really want love and connection, but they'll settle for appreciation. And so they're always looking for that love and that connection with people. And then threes, in the same way, they are dealing with the idea of identity with what other people are defining it as. They are the successful competitors. They are the achievers. They're the walking motivational posters of the Enneagram. And they are always getting things done in this super efficient way. They're always about efficiency. It's because they don't want to be incompetent or worthless or lack success. And success is defined by whatever their culture is around them. It's not an internal measure of this is what's successful. This is what the people around me say is successful. And they're always wanting that admiration and that value and identity and validation from that. And their core weakness is traditionally called deceit, but it's not about lying. Enneagram 3 is not walking around lying to people. What they are doing is they're kind of buying into a persona that helps them appear in the successful manner that they want to appear. And what they want to know is that they don't have to do that. Deep down, you are just loved for who you are outside of your accomplishments, outside of anything that you do in the world. I always want to remind my threes that you are human beings, not human doings. And that's the message for the threes. And then the type fours in this heart triad are the romantic individualists, and they are about creating. And and it's because they're afraid of being emotionally isolated or inauthentic to who they are on the inside, that if they aren't connected to that inner knowing of who they are, then they might not be significant. And if I'm not special, then who am I in the world? And what happens if I don't have the very thing that helps me get that? This envy comes up for them. That's their core weakness of like, oh, everybody else has this thing that's going to make them special and amazing. And I'm missing that. I'm missing that piece of me, which isn't true, but that's what they are telling themselves. And what they really want to be is seen and known, that they are truly experienced in their fullness of who they are. And so they create things all the time. I always say a four is the person who said, I'm going to create space for this, because they are creating and really hold lots of space for emotions and their own emotions and other people's emotions. And they're really wonderful gifts for us for that, of learning how to deal with our emotions in ways that other people just want to move on past, and they're like ready to sit with that. And that's really helpful to all of us. And then we move to the head center, and their core struggle is fear. And we start with the fives. And I like to call them the investigative specialists because they're always observing and thinking. And so you have to tell me if you think this is accurate. But their core fear is really not knowing, of being lacking the capability or being ignorant on something. And if people need this information that I have, what if I don't have it? And then it depletes their energy. So we talked about 8s having the most energy, 9s having the least, and 5s have a measured amount of energy. So a lot of their fear comes around, what if I don't have enough energy to give? What if I don't know enough and I can't get to what other people need? So the world feels a little overwhelming. And it's because they're always wanting to be capable and competent. Like, I want to know the things to feel that capability. And their core fear is avarice. And it's not Scrooge McDuck and the pile of gold. Like it's avarice in this. I have to hoard my resources and my energy, and I have to minimize my needs, because what if there's too much interaction with the outside world and I won't have enough energy, this like depletion. And what they really want to know is that their needs are not a problem, that they can't think their way into not having any needs. And that's this core struggle for the 5. And they're just such thinkers. I had in a Clubhouse room one time, I was making this joke and then it really happened. I always say 5s are like people with PhDs that are like, well, I'm not an expert in that topic. And then I literally had somebody who is a PhD in a room who is a 5 and say, well, I'm not an expert. I'm like, you have 5 years of post-grad work after your doctorate. You are arguably an expert, but there's always more to know.
Well, that was one of the things that has always come with me. One is the measuring time. Like, someone likened it to your iPhone battery only holds 70%, where everybody else holds 100. And you have to go through the day and figure out where you're going to recharge and replug back in. And the other is, I went to that certification class, and everybody there is like, has written books or been on stage speaking or whatever like this. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't have a place at this table. Like, imposter syndrome. I have a book idea I've written about, several thousand words for, it's like this, and it's just still sitting in a file somewhere, like not wanting to take that chance or put it out there because it's not right yet. So I definitely
and it's not so much perfect, it's the competency. Like a lot of 5s, I don't know if you struggle with this, a lot of 5s will say things like, well, I know there's more, but here's what I know, and they want to make sure everybody's aware that they know that there's more things, because they don't want to appear incompetent even in that statement.
Yeah. Anyway, we can talk more about my number, but let's go on and finish. We have 6s and 7s left.
6s and 7s. So 6s are the loyal skeptics, and they are always preparing. So they are looking for support and guidance and security. And so their way to not experience blame or be physically or emotionally abandoned is to prepare for events. And sometimes that's rehearsing conversations. Sometimes that is a bag full of first aid kits and things. Sometimes that is contingency plan after contingency plan, like decision tree, massive decision trees. And like, if this and this and this and this happens for them. And that's their way to cope with this fear of what happens if I get abandoned or I get blamed. And so their core weakness is angst, which is not quite the same as anxiety, but this kind of constant turmoil, tension of what if I'm not prepared enough? What if I didn't predict this and something bad happened? So they're in this state of angst a lot. And what they're wanting to know to unravel that angst is that they're safe and secure, that they're not going to be abandoned, that they're safe in the world, and they can relax in making good decisions. So 1s have this one voice, this one internal critic that's berating them, and 6s have an internal committee. So, we're all in churches. We've experienced decision by committee. And so if you've got that inside your head, that creates a lot of angst. There's a lot of different voices. And so knowing that core longing of knowing that they will be safe and they can make good decisions is a huge thing for 6s. And then the last ones, and the other reason we start with the 8s is so we end with the 7s, because 7s are like, but what about me? And then they'll leave. So I can say that as a 7. So 7s are the enthusiastic visionaries, and they are planning so they don't get trapped. So they avoid and move outside of pain, and they don't want to be trapped in that type of pain or limited. A 7 absolutely is the person who developed the word FOMO and probably YOLO. So like, you only live once, and fear of missing out, because that is the core fear of the 7. What if I miss out on the thing that is going to make me happy? So I'm going to avoid the pain so I can be contented and happy and satisfied. And their core weakness is this veracity, this idea of this insatiable desire to fill up. What if this emptiness never goes away? And so they fill it up with experiences, with knowledge, some type of stimulation to feel content. And what they want to know is that they will be taken care of, that their needs and their emotional and physical and spiritual needs are taken care of, and that they're not going to be trapped forever in that type of pain. So 7s are always looking for this idea of what's next, what can fill me up. And what they want to know is, I have enough right now to be satisfied and happy. So that is a small to medium around the circle of all the different Enneagram types.
That was definitely a quick tour, and thank you for kind of that overview. Just out of curiosity, I mean, do we know, or is there any research or any ideas or hunches about are more of the population more one number, or are there any one number that's more dominant or not as dominant from what you know?
So I have thoughts and feelings and intuition. That's how I'm going to preface that. I do not have research data. But there is this pervasive idea in most Enneagram circles that there are more 6s in the world than any other type. And that there are probably the least number of 4s. And other than that, there is not a lot of, there isn't just good research study to know if that's true or not. But in my experience, we definitely have this idea in the States that we have this really strong 3 culture in most of America. And so a lot of people think that they should be 3s, but they're probably 6s. And so that happens a lot as I've dealt with people. They're like, well, I think I'm a 3 because, this is what I need to do, rather than show their own motivation. They're like, oh, this is what I should be, not here's what I actually am. And so that happens in all kinds of cultures. And I've had these great conversations with other cultures that have different identifying numbers, but that's where I think most people live, in this land of 6 being the most common. In leadership roles, I like to call the 7s, 8s, and 3s the naturals, because that's how, at least in our Western culture, we elevate that type of leader. People who are out front, they're independent, they're thinking in the future, they're getting stuff done, they're high energy. And those 3 numbers are what you see a lot of in corporate spaces. I think if you were a youth leader, you're probably a lot of 7s and 3s. Like, there's a lot of that group in there. The morphing and the fun, those 2 things really come together in youth ministry quite a bit. But so in my experience, that's what I've seen. There's a lot of leaders who are in that 8, 3, 7 space. And in the youth area, there's a lot of 7s, 9s as well, which is funny, and 3s. Those 3 come about a lot.
So maybe I'm sitting here listening to this conversation, and I've heard you talk about the numbers and do that quick overview. And maybe I've gone online and found a couple of tests to take. But what is the real good way to determine what your number is? I mean, is it the tests, or is it maybe a book, or what do you suggest? What's the best way to figure out someone's number?
Love this question. So I have a big disclaimer and then 3 steps, just to preface that. So my big disclaimer is, I don't suggest taking tests. And the reason is the Enneagram is all about deep internal motivations. That self-awareness often exists in this place where it's hidden from you and hidden from others. It can be very hard to see. And what that requires is some introspection, some time, journaling, prayer, sitting with yourself, all these things that we don't like in the Western world. We want to go, boop, 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 here you are, and ta-da. And that's just, that is a lot to ask from a multiple choice test to give all of that thing. So that is my prep. I'm just saying that. If you want to take a test, you can, but I always want people to see it as an indicator, not a decider. It's never a decider. Even me as a professional Enneagram teacher, and I hate to call myself an expert, but like with expertise in the Enneagram, I can't type you. That is your work to do. And that the journey of discovering your type is the practice that you need to do the rest of Enneagram work. It's a little bit like why it's really important to do either a balance bike or a training wheel bike. You have to get your muscles strong enough to figure that out before you can ride a real bike. And the process of discovering your type is like that. So that's my big disclaimer. So the first thing I love for people to do is listen to descriptions like this or read descriptions like that. If you aren't a big reader, then a short descriptions like the ones that I went through, I've got something on my website that gives them short descriptions. The Enneagram Institute has great longer descriptions. If you're a book person, I highly recommend The Road Back to You. It's the easiest primer. I love that one. It gives checklists, it gives descriptions, but it's incredibly accessible. And so that's the first step is read descriptions and see what jumps out at you for your motivation, not your behavior, not I like my desk neat, not, I go back and I close the garage door all the time, or I have to have a schedule, not that, but the underneath of like, oh, why am I doing that? What is underneath this behavior that is the motivation behind that? And all types, all the motivations of all the types exist within us. We all want to be loved. We all want to be contented. We all don't want to be rejected. We all want to be seen. We all want to protect ourselves, all of that. And so I like to describe it like a bus. We're all of those are on the bus, but one of them's driving. And so understanding who's driving that bus for you is the process of going through the motivation. So when you see the descriptions written out in those places, start to identify which one of those hit home. And often for the majority of people, the one that you're like, oh crap, I've been trying to keep that hidden. Like you just read my mail. The one that makes you a little uncomfortable is probably one you need to dig into a little bit. Most people are like, oh, this is totally great. That is not your number. Like sometimes sevens do that. We're like, yeah, totally. But then we dig in, we're like, oh, right. I didn't know you could see that. But so those motivations that you've been trying to keep hidden a little bit, that's the one to really dig into and pay attention to. So that's the first step. And then the second thing is listening to podcasts and descriptions of people talking about life through the lens of their number. So you're describing your experience with the 7 youth leader and you're wanting something different out of that and describing your own inner thought world. And what happens is you hear this and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that other people think that. You are inside my head. That is exactly what I think. That helps you start to identify your number. And then so like 2B, I would say would be talk to an Enneagram professional, talk to a coach, talk to a teacher. And we have a different way of asking questions to help you start to see things differently that help you identify your number. But it can definitely be a process. Some people know their number right away. It's really obvious to them. Other people like to often go through a process of months or even years of trying some on. And is this right or not? You don't have to get there fast. It's okay that you're discovering it because that is part of how we apply it. What is showing up for me right now? And the more practice that you have at asking yourself that question of in this situation where we are trying to figure out about the PowerPoint and does this, connect? Is this right? Wait a second. Is this really about the PowerPoint or am I afraid that someone's going to see me as imperfect? Am I afraid that someone's going to see me as incompetent? Is this wasting my time? Those are the things that we have to start paying attention to. So in the identification process, if you are really looking into what's showing up for me right now, that's the work of the Enneagram. That's the work of how we keep moving forward. So it's a good practice to develop those muscles.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm a 5, and most of the descriptions and things that I have read have kind of confirmed that. But it has taken a while to kind of maybe bounce back and forth between a few and to try to see, hey, what really describes my motivations the best. We have a lot of youth leaders who are listening to this, and they may be wondering how they can utilize this within their youth group or such. But I just want a word and a question. Is there an age or a cautions about when you should utilize this or what you should do if you have kids or youth? I mean, do you have to wait until you're an adult? Can you speak a little more about that?
Absolutely. And I love this question. I will not get up on a soapbox about it, though. I will, but I have one. It's ready. So here's the thing about our personalities is while most Enneagram teachers, and I also believe this, that our numbers are part of our makeup. They're part of how God put us into the world. However, that our upbringing helps either make that really flexible or it makes it really solidified and calcified, this structure through which we see the world. And as children go through developmental stages, so if you're working with youth and you haven't done a ton of like child development, but you'll probably identify with this if you haven't. If you're dealing with middle schoolers, they're all about identity. Who am I in the world? What is going on? And then high schoolers have moved beyond that a little bit. They're asking the bigger questions of, is this the person I'm supposed to be in the world? And how do I interact with myself and God and others? And what will life be like as I develop? And so those questions, and then there's this huge separation from leaving the family to developing my own identity and identifying more with peers. And that moves throughout adolescence. Well, if you're in that space and you're starting to talk about self-awareness, it can be really easy to not dig into your own thoughts and be like, well, everybody else is a 4, so I'm going to be a 4 because I need an identity. I need something. And so that is my caution against using the Enneagram directly with children and teenagers. So I usually say around 17, 18, they've moved. We're all susceptible to peer pressure. Come on. But by 17 or 18, they're a little bit more aware of their own, like, oh, this is okay that I'm different than this person. And it's a good space to do that. And so that's where I would suggest starting it. So late high school, early college is a great time to really start digging into the Enneagram. You are never too old, but I do think there are some developmental cautions there. And at the same time, as adults who know the Enneagram, it doesn't mean that we can't use it to help us interact with children and youth. So I know about myself, I'm going to get real excited. I'm going to avoid pain. And so I might not want to lean into a conversation with a kid because that's going to be painful. So how do I work around that? So use it for yourself. But also, this is my advice for all parents, all youth leaders. I should say I've got 4 kids and 3 of them are teenagers and 1 is 11 right now. So we're living this. And I was a youth leader for 15 years and taught school. And so I get it. But this works so well there are groups of 3s in the Enneagram called stances, and they're around the idea of those centers of intelligence that we talked about earlier. And so I like to ask questions in these 3 areas. What do you think? What do you feel? And what do you want to do? If you develop questions around those 3 centers of intelligence, you will start to see which one kids don't like. So like, I've got a kiddo that if you ask her what she wants to do, she's going to fall apart on the floor. Like, oh my gosh, there's way too much work. So I'm pretty sure she's going to be a 4, 5, or 9. Like, that's just where we're going with that. But for right now, she's really good at describing how she thinks, and she's really good at describing how she feels. She's getting that, and so I can help her. Okay, so when you're making a decision, what makes that hard for you? How can I help you through that? So I can start to help her develop that one center of intelligence that isn't going so well for her. I got another kid that is like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And I was like, how do you feel about that? I don't know. Here's what I want to do. And here's what I think about, and so you can start to see how you can help kids make some decisions and choices and self-awareness for themselves. And then also lead them to how God fills that need. I'm afraid of making the choice. Why are you afraid of making the decision? Who is God in your life that fear comes up? And how can I lead you into greater connection with Jesus as a youth leader through these types of questions? And so those are the 3 questions that I always encourage parents and youth people to use, because it's going to show you where their fears lie. And then you can start helping them see how God covers those and helps us through those.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I have always wondered as I've studied more of the Enneagram and learned more about myself is, how does my personality, how does my Enneagram number, my center of intelligence, or my thinking or heart or action, how does that affect how we approach faith and worship and God and theology? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? Is that something that's been studied, or anything you want to share?
I think it does, because it's always about our motivation, what I'm motivated to know. So lots of 5s, digging in and wanting to know and really approaching God first through their minds. And that also happens for people who are trying to answer questions of faith. And some of them dig deep into these questions of faith, and others of them dig through a deconstruction process. And it doesn't necessarily mean their faith is better at the end or not, but they're always going to approach it with thinking first. And so I think that personality strategy and those core fears come out in how we approach God and who he is. So being afraid of pain, the concepts of suffering in scripture are super challenging for me. Like, cause I'm doing everything I can to avoid suffering. So why are you talking about suffering so much? And I'm like, so that's where my faith has to grow. It's not so much the behaviors, but that approach of how do I connect with who God is? So me, learning, oh my gosh, this is what's happening for me. I am suffering. Wow, scripture is full of ways to make suffering meaningful, full of ways that God is with me in suffering. And that starts to address this need for me of being taken care of. God's going to take care of me. Other people may approach suffering very differently. So I think that's where those motivations show up. A lot of it is also cultural. So I grew up in a fairly charismatic, reformed type community. So it didn't matter really what number you were probably going to be clapping and raising your hands and dancing and such. Whereas that might've been more comfortable for one group than another. But that cultural, it's not an expectation, but just cultural norm was, this is what we're doing and here's why. And so I think some of those behaviors, we can see patterns, but we don't necessarily always know what's motivating that pattern, because we can all do the same thing and it come from a very different motivational space.
So listening to this, you have youth leaders, you may have pastors, you may have other leaders, maybe nonprofits or teachers, and just some people who work every day in their office, or they lead small groups, or the volunteers. What are some of the ways that we can utilize this? I mean, you're a coach, you work with conflict resolution, and I know that you work with teams. So how can we utilize the Enneagram in all of those different roles that we have and we find ourselves every day?
There's just so many. And there's all the research out there that people who are more self-aware make more effective team members. They create highly effective teams. They tend to make more money, and they tend to reach their goals and objectives better. And it's because they know who they are and where they shine and where their deficits are and where their predictable pitfalls are going to be. And the Enneagram gives us that language to help us see, oh, here is what's motivating me. Here is why this is hard for me, or here's why this is really easy for me. And if we can start to understand the group dynamic in that way, then you can assign roles, responsibilities. All of those things can be structured around here's where my skill set lies. And here is also what's motivating me. So for me in particular, and ones and fours and sevens, we have to know that it's like, we're all about the ideal. We're always about the ideal and what's going to be the best way to do something. Now we approach it a little bit differently, but if you want somebody to dream with, that's where you're going to go. If you want somebody to execute, I am probably not, like, I have to develop that skill set. Now I have developed that skill set, but I would much prefer to be the person who's designing and creating and coming up with the fun, and then being the person who does the performance day, but all the stuff in between, I don't want to do that. But those ways to know. So don't put Jenn on spreadsheets. And now, is that because I'm an Enneagram 7? A little bit, but it's also because I find that that skill set doesn't work well for me. Whereas somebody else, I don't know if you like spreadsheets, but probably Enneagram ones are like, give me a spreadsheet like that, so we can plan it out. And not all Enneagram ones are like that, but many of them are, because they want that. So we are a great team together. It also develops that compassion that I was talking about at the beginning. So I am not now offended because you are a 5 and want to go think about it. I now can give you the grace to give the time to go think about it and know that you're going to come back with a better answer. And you have the grace for me and my whiteboard of spider monkey ideas that, like, I call it my starburst mind. There's like 1,000 ideas, and know that I'm not trying to derail the process. That's how my mind works. And that we can all glean from both of those processes. And what we're always trying to do when we come together is to get everybody's best to help the community move forward. And that's where the Enneagram can really support that work. So you get compassion, you get better ideas, and you feel seen and known. There's a lot of research about employee engagement. And I don't know, in nonprofit space, people talk a little bit about that. In corporate space, they talk about employee engagement all the time and kind of miss the boat. I think ministry and nonprofit, we do want to see people, and the Enneagram helps us see people, and that increases employee engagement. And so, because if people feel seen and known, it's not just about being appreciated, it's about being known, and they want to do more. They want to contribute. They want their place and role and belonging in the group for who they are. And I think those are the spaces that it can help teams of volunteers. It can help teams and support the goals of the whole.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen how the Enneagram has helped not only myself be more aware of my blind spots and my motivations, but how it has worked within our team at my church to help us to offer more grace, to step in and help each other in different areas, and to become more aware and focused on our goals as a team. This has been great, and I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you, and I hope we can do this again sometime soon. But for now, as we are closing up, if someone wants to learn more about you, about what you are doing, about the Enneagram, or how to contact you and get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah. So the best way to find all of the good stuff is at jennwhitmer.com/freebies. So on that website, I will have my latest workshop that I'm doing. I do free workshops about once a month around conflict and your personality type and how to overcome conflict. I've got a free download called Why Do I Keep Doing This?, which is a short 6-page introduction. It's lots of bullets of the different types. So if you're not ready for the book yet and you want just a little introduction, it's also a great resource to keep around when you're dealing with team members and you know who they are and you're like, okay, wait, this is what's happening. How can I help support them? So I have that there. And then if you want to, on Thursdays, most Thursdays on LinkedIn, I do a LinkedIn Live. I've got a really active Instagram community. I have a Facebook group, all those places about how to use the Enneagram in life and business to support those goals. All of that can be found at jennwhitmer.com/freebies. I love working with teams, and I do virtual and in-person events. So if you want me to come in and work with your team. I can do that for an hour. I can do that for a full day. We can do retreats. I love, love, love helping people grow in their confidence, in their peace, and their community together. And so there's all kinds of tools that come with that. I have a new resource that's coming out about leadership styles that takes all the different personality types, and you can use the Strengths Finders, the Colby, the DISC, Myers-Briggs, and Enneagram, and see how that all works together. So that's coming out soon as well.
Yeah, that's something I've always kind of wondered is if you layer all those on top of each other, are there similarities? Are there like things that work together with each of the different Strength Finders and different studies and personality tests? How they work together. But that's beside the point. You do have a lot of stuff on your website. And so I encourage people to go check that out. And there's links to everything that you mentioned, as well as you've sent us a list of other links, and we'll put all of those into the show notes.
And come say hi. I love DMs. So if you heard this, shoot me a DM on Instagram. I'm at Jenn_Whitmer, or LinkedIn. Those are the places I am the most. Come say hi. Tell me you heard it on this podcast. And I always love that.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything you want to share as we close out?
One thing that I didn't say that I always want to make sure people know is that do not use the Enneagram as a sword or a shield. It is not intended to be, you're such an 8, and attack people with things. And it's also not an excuse for your own behavior and your own poor choices. It's just because I'm a 3, I can't cope with that. That is, neither one of those are helpful. And it's not the goal. The goal is always to find who God has created you to be, his purposes for you in the world, and to grow in sanctification. It is never an attack, and it's never a shield. And so I always want to encourage people with that it's not your whole identity, and it's never meant to be a sword or a shield.
Well, Jenn, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with us and taking time today to teach us more about the Enneagram and how to utilize it, how not to utilize it, and the ways it can be beneficial to us. So I hope to talk to you again soon on here, and we will continue to connect on Instagram and Clubhouse and other ways as well. So have a great day.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Wow. I mean, that was awesome. And I'm so glad that she sat down with us and talked with us. And I hope that you found this helpful and you gleaned some things from this that you'll be able to use as you continue in ministry. Hey, do me a favor, and wherever you're listening to this, go click subscribe if you haven't done that already. That will ensure that these conversations come straight to whatever podcast listener you are on. And also let us know. Send us a tag on social media at Talk Student Men, and let us know you're listening, and maybe even write a review and to tell others. Well, we are excited to have several great episodes coming up, and that begins with next week's conversation. Brent sits down and talks with Joe Roberts, and they talk about how you can partner with youth sports to find some opportunities that might not exist in your church, maybe some ministry that happens on a basketball court or connecting with parents or different things, the opportunities that exist with youth sports for ministry. So I hope you will join us for that, and we look forward to seeing you next week.